There are many endeavors to which God may call us into service. Some are called to pulpits, some to police cruisers or fighter jets, others to corporate boardrooms, and still others to homemaking or volunteer organizations. There is much to be done toward redeeming a fallen world to wholeness and our country to brotherhood and greatness. Our guest today answered God's call to serve others by choosing a career as a youth justice consultant. Jonathan I. Cloud has over 30 years of experience in the social services field that encompasses counseling, case management, administration, and program development. His career has included special initiatives focused on juvenile justice reform, community policing, human trafficking, school safety, gang violence, gun violence, youth development, child protective services, foster care reform, and trauma-informed care. In 2020, he designed and successfully piloted a developmentally informed framework for probation practice called Growth-Focused Youth Justice Case Management. As of 2023, the framework is being utilized in 7 jurisdictions around the country. Through a formal agreement, Jonathan is working with the RFK National Resource Center for Juvenile Justice to provide training and technical assistance to jurisdictions around the country. Cultural and moral shifts in our nation have spawned family and community conditions that make it difficult for some youths to thrive, therefore leading them into disruptive and criminal behaviors. However, with the work of professionals such as Jonathan I. Cloud, there was a 75% decline in youth incarceration between the year 2000 and 2022. And in fact, youth offending is predominantly non-violent. Between 2000 and 2018, roughly only 5% of youth arrests were for offenses categorized by the FBI as violent crimes, including aggravated assault, robbery, rape, and murder. However, that proportion increased to 8% in 2020. Despite improvements in juvenile delinquency, there is still much to be done, as we will learn from our guest today. Yes, we must not allow the tremendous potential of our youths to be wasted to languishing lives and criminality, when among them might be the person to cure cancer, invent new technologies, or serve in other ways to make our nation flourish. So, get your pencil and pad out. You might want to take notes on this one. Here we go. Welcome, Jonathan. I've been looking forward to this interview with you, and not just because we're brothers, though, but because you are doing some very important work in this country. And everybody really would be benefited by hearing what you're doing. And in this time in our history where we're having so many changes in our culture that it's affecting families, the work you're doing is extremely important. So welcome to the Orange Pill Podcast. Really. We get together to peel the covers back on juicy hidden truths.
Love it, man. Appreciate the invite, and yeah, I'm with you on that. It is an important topic, but it is sort of icing on the cake that you're my brother. So this is great.
All right, so let's start off with a little background. So you graduate of Harding University, right?
Yes, that takes me back 1984, 85, somewhere in there, which seems like ages ago. But yes, I'm a Harding grad. That's my alma mater. Yes.
So we had a guest on recently, Sammy Berry. He's the minister at the Dallas West Church of Christ now. Okay. And I think he was there about the same time you were. I'm not 100% sure. And he's still very active in the college there. And one of the reasons we had a conversation with him was really related to our conversation. And that is that the university environments are really important for setting culture and for helping our young people get a good start. And so we were discussing how important education was in helping youths become responsible, productive adults.
Oh, love it. Fantastic topic. And we deal with that a lot in my work. the impact of that phase of life, and especially with the research now telling us that we've got a whole new stage of development that now referred to as emerging adulthood. It used to be adolescence and then adult. The researchers have scratched that and said that no, from 18 to about 26, 27, we're going to call it emerging adulthood. And it's during that extended period of time that environments like universities are critical to forming identity. So yeah, that was a great podcast and a great topic to address.
So, if you were running a university, what would you do in your university to help address the issues of our youths and our juveniles and the delinquency that takes place as a result of broken families?
I love that question because I'd spend some time with them on, well, let me start this way. They come in very, very focused, and you've got to get your classes selected and what your major is going to be and what you're going to get your degree in and what your employment track is going to be. Very important. But what often gets missing in that is spending enough time discovering who you are, and in particular, what your strengths, your interests, your passions are. Not necessarily that you can follow all of that, but so that you can bring that part of yourself into whatever your profession or career may be. It might be nursing, it might be something in a technological field, but if you spend enough time in enough activities and doing enough things to figure out I'm really good at putting people at ease, or I really have a passion for finding out new things. Learning those little nuggets about yourself, we're finding with young people is absolutely critical because it gives you a sense of meaning and it makes your work meaningful. And when that job becomes boring and when those classes get hard, and when you're even deep into your career, if you haven't figured out what my passion is that I'm bringing to my work, it's going to make it more difficult for you. So if I were in a university, I'd really say, first semester, there's a big chunk of time we want to spend with you all exploring and discovering who you are, what your passions are, and what the strengths are that you are born with and what you came into the world with.
So I hadn't really planned to talk about this, but you really opened up a door here, and
Okay.
let's see how this resonates with you. One of the things I've been doing with our church is study on culture, and it's led me to study some of the great philosophers that have pumped out the the current thinking in identity. And I think of Kierkegaard and Hegel, and these guys uh, basically have led us to a point where identity is based on feelings. So I am whatever I feel. And so, interestingly enough, these guys come out of universities. And so I think quite often the philosophies that are ruling the thinking of our youths is not well thought out. So I'd
I
like for you to react to that.
Yes, would love to react to that. And when you took it to, they very often based on how I feel, that's absolutely spot on. That is a direction we've taken, and we even see that in the juvenile delinquency field, where young people are, this is what I feel, it's what I feel I want. Well, going back to the ancient Greeks had another perspective. The ancient Greeks had another word for happiness and for feeling, and it was called eudaimonia. That's a fancy word, but we now have a whole field of research today that looks at what's called eudaimonic well-being, and it translates into happiness. But there's two kinds. There is hedonic, which is I feel good, how I feel. And then there's eudaimonic, which is what is my potential and how do I fulfill my potential? And so the eudaimonic well-being research is looking at you've got to step back and not go with what feels right, but you've got to really reflect. And Plato was big on this. Plato was very big on you've got to reflect on who you are and what the greater good that you might bring. And that's called your eudaimonia, your potential, what you're born with. So I think that we don't engage our young people in the work that is actually involved in developing and forming identity. And in my work, which we'll get into later, I've delved deep enough into the research to define the 5 cognitive tasks, mental tasks you've got to take on consciously to figure out and to form and shape your identity. So your identity is not what you feel like. Your identity is something that you actually have to work through and construct it. And it's actually called identity formation, constructing your identity, and it's a job. And the last piece I'll say to this one, Avery, is young people need help from grown-ups in getting that task figured out. You don't come into that naturally. You got to have certain supports and guidances to help you work through those mental tasks. So yeah, I agree with that. I think you're on the right track. That sometimes we just say, I am what I feel like I am, but no, you are deeper than that. I'm gonna give you one more, then I'll give back to you. The outside the Temple of Apollo, not that I'm into that stuff, but outside the Temple of Apollo in ancient Greece, they had this inscription that is the foundation of a whole field of research today. And the inscription was, know yourself. And then the next one was, become what you are. And I love that. First of all, know yourself, figure out who you are, and then become that. Become that. That takes work. It's not about feeling. That is about having enough experiences, activities, efforts to begin to discover who I am, what my strengths, talents are. So, yes.
Oh, those are great insights. I'm going to take you further down the rabbit hole. So,
Okay.
so then we have Freud that comes in and makes it even more complicated, because he says the primary part of our identity is your gender identification, and what brings you pleasure sexually. He said that we should live to avoid unpleasure and pursue that which brings pleasure, and nothing brings more pleasure than sex. So now our confused young people have that on top of the Nietzschean philosophy that says there is no God, and so there is not an absolute upon which they can base anything. So I just think we have an interesting environment today, a culture that makes people like you even more important than they've ever been. So what do you think?
Thanks. No, I think you're right. Yes, Sigmund Freud really took us in a very, very difficult, very, 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 very bad direction. And you're right. I think it's even called the pleasure principle. It's in some of his writings. Which is why, going back to what I mentioned earlier, which is why I love so much that ancient Greek eudaimonia, that there's hedonic happiness, and that's Freud. Hedonia. It's like we get from that the word hedonism is the word we get from that. But hedonic is it's feeling good, what gives me pleasure, what gratifies me. That in itself, according to Plato and Aristotle, is not the greater good. That is not where we are. That we've got to find out that deeper part of ourselves, the eudaimonic side of things. So to begin to move down that path takes the work of discovering and knowing what we are, and not just rolling with our feelings and what feels good and what makes me sort of happy on a more surface level. Yes.
You talked about the hard work of personal discovery and establishing identity, and I really love it that you said that kids can't do that without the help of adults.
That's right.
And that is the reason I am focusing where I am, and I believe that the church has a very important role to play in that. And I'm not sure the church has lived up to it in the past. And so I believe that in that environment, that you have men and women who really should have a clear view of who they are, because they base their identity on who God is. And from that, they can help young folks discover the them and then help them launch into a productive adulthood. So I really believe the church is another one of those institutions that can help, and that's where I'm trying to serve in my retirement.
I love it. I love it. You've just described what I view to be God's plan, nature's plan for human development. Joseph Pierce, one of my favorite writers, and he looks at the brain science, and he talks about our potential, and his phrase is there must be what's called a model imperative. The model imperative. And his explanation of that is what you just said, that the possibilities that every young person has, they need a model, a visual model of that possibility happening around them. That doesn't mean that you've got to be all of that, but it just means that you've got to be a symbol to this young person of what's going on inside of them. So those models are critically important. The other writer that speaks to that, Avery, is a guy by the name of Michael Gurian, who wrote a book, and I really recommend this to our churches because he goes in a direction that is really about truth, but he doesn't use biblical language for it. But if you know biblical language, you know where he's going. And the title of his book is Nurturing the Nature. Nurturing the Nature. And that is, he says, when we are born with what he calls a core personality. One of our philosophers, maybe you've come across him in your readings, was John Locke, who said that when we were born, we are tabula rasa, we are blank slates, we're nothing. And we are what our environments make of us. Not true. Not true. When we're born, we have a core personality, an image stamped upon us that is our unique calling. And what he does in his book is does a beautiful job of helping parents understand how to catch flashes of that, how to interact with your child in a way that you start seeing what is that core personality, that thing inside of them that now needs to be brought out. And then I, as an adult, can start modeling that and supporting that and encouraging that. Let me give it, for those who might get lost with this, a very simple example. And let me just say as a disclaimer, I made a ton of mistakes as a parent. I'm not a perfect parent, okay? I messed some stuff up. So when my
You're
son
not
told me,
alone in that.
okay. Right? But one of the things I saw in my son, who's now 38, 39 years old, one of the things I saw with him early on was his propensity for taking on challenges. And he loved like defeating things. That's the only way I know how to describe it. Whenever we'd play games on the floor, he liked taking on challenges, all right? He was born with that. That's from God. Now, what I have to do with that is provide a model of that. What do you do with that sort of thing? And so we played games and we did things, and it was easy for me. I really think I got a break because I could expose him to things that propensity is perfect for. And early on, it was sports and athletics. Later on, it became the Marine Corps because the Marine Corps is where you challenge things and take things on, right? But early on, it was sports because you have to beat the other team. And so that's what I mean by core personality, paying enough attention to the young people around us to see in them what they may not see in themselves, and then interacting with them and giving them opportunities to bring that out.
That's beautiful. And I have to just bring this up. You mentioned your son, the ex-Marine, and he's been inspirational in my grandson's life because my grandson seems natured a lot like your son.
Ah,
As a matter of fact, I picked up on that competitive. I must defeat.
defeat.
I must
Yeah,
win.
yeah.
And so to help that along, we daily had Nerf gun battles.
Love it. Love
But of course, I'm a gadget guy, so I got really kind of way out there. I bought a battery operated one that was semi-auto.
I love it. I love it. Leave it up to you, man.
But anyway, back to I'm going to throw a rope to you here and pull you out of this rabbit hole but it's been a great place to dwell for just a few moments. So,
Absolutely. It's been
so
excellent.
talk
Yeah.
talk to me about who or what the Robert F. Kennedy National Resource Center for Juvenile Justice is and is about.
Okay, there are a number of organizations in the United States that focus on youth justice in all kinds of fields. They are one of them, and in sort of in the spirit of the Kennedy family, they really pay close attention to how youth justice systems work with and interact with young people, and making sure that those systems are fair. And so they will come in and do in various cities. They would do what they refer to as a juvenile probation review. And that means they'll just look at your whole system and help you figure out some things you need to do to fix it and make it work more effectively. They also do some work around the difficulty that young people have in starting off in the child welfare system when families are breaking down, this child abuse, neglect, and then those youth end up crossing over into the juvenile justice system because they didn't get what they needed. So there is some good work around how do you work with youth who didn't get a good start, and now they're doing this criminal behavior. We can't dismiss the criminal behavior, but we do need to understand that terrible start they had. How do we work with them? So they do fantastic work with that. And it just so happens that I know the executive director because he worked at the Department of Justice when I was a contractor, a consultant for the Department of Justice. And so our paths crossed 30 years ago, somewhere in that ballpark. And then later on, we lost contact, and he discovered that I was doing work in Milwaukee County and scheduled himself to sort of see what I was doing and saw that my work fit perfectly with their work and established a formal agreement to work alongside me. So that's sort of that's a background on RFK National Resource Center for Juvenile Justice.
So let's get into what you've developed. You've developed a tool that is taking hold. I remember reading that some 9 adult facilities are looking at adopting your tool, and at least a few large cities are looking at your tool. So let me turn it over to you, and you tell us what you've done.
Okay. First, I'll tell you what it's called. It's called Growth Focused Youth Justice Case Management. And so in the juvenile justice system, when the youth comes in, it becomes a case, and you got to manage that case. And so what I did is looked at the way we manage those cases when they come in. And that process is called formal processing. Come in, you got a charge from the police department, you've got to have an investigation. We determine what we're going to do. You got to go meet with a judge. Then you come back, and then we're going to do an assessment of you. Then you're going to come back, and the judge is going to give you what you're supposed to do. We got to decide this, we got to decide that. So that is the formal process. Took a close look at that. And the research that came back on that said that one of our big problems is what they're experiencing when they are being formally processed makes them more likely to reoffend again. And that's what put me to work. Because I said, we've got to do something about that. Because that doesn't make any sense. They get into trouble, they get arrested, they come into this system, and by being in the system, they're more likely to reoffend.
Yeah, we train them to be worse than they were.
You got it. Absolutely. It's what happens. And many people say, well, it's because they're associating with other juvenile delinquents. No, that's not it, actually. Actually, what they found out is, I'm going to introduce your audience to a pretty fancy term, but it's called reflected appraisal. And reflected appraisal is my perception of how you perceive me. That's reflected appraisal. How I think you think about me. How I perceive that you look at me. And some of your folks in your audience may be familiar with labeling theory. So when you call me a delinquent, when you treat me like an offender, I'm more likely to offend. It's called reflected appraisal, and the research is solid on that. If I think you think I'm a screw up, It sets off processes in my brain that makes me more likely to go out and screw up. So I figured out that I've got to figure out a way to help our probation officers. They are the folks who work with the youth when they come in, to help them work with them in a way that doesn't do that, that actually shifts that and helps them to grow. And so growth focused case management is sort of a four-phase process that helps young people have five basic experiences in the youth justice system. And I just give you those five experiences very, very quickly. And and you can imagine when I introduce this to jurisdictions around the country, they're like, are you kidding me? We don't have time for this. And then they sit back and they listen to it and they go, okay, I guess we got to slow it down. I said, because it is what they're experiencing that is the problem. No, they're in trouble and we can't let them go. Some of them jack a car at gunpoint. And I am not advocating that you send them home. I am not advocating that you go easy on them. They're walking around with a 357 Magnum or a Glock 19, right, jacking people, okay? But if their experience of what we do with them reinforces that negativity, they won't change. So here are the five experiences that they're being trained to do, and we train them to have with specific practices to do this. The first experience that we want them to have in this framework is help them to see something positive about themselves. What are their strengths? And I know that's a heavy lift for some of our people, but in one jurisdiction, one of the people who at the front end in investigations, he came in, he said, I'm so glad you're here because I do that with kids when I talk to them. No matter how bad the offense was, I find something in them that is a strength, that is a positive, absolutely key. Because if you want them to form a positive identity, they've got to see something positive within themselves in order to do that. If all they see is bad, how are you going to form a positive identity? Everything about me is screwed up, but you want me to be somebody positive. So the first is his positive experience. The last four, I hit them very, very quickly. The second is form an idea of who you want to be in the future that's positive. It's called an ideal self. The third experience is let's experience learning about who you have been and who you are now. And so when we do these assessments, it is not to find out how bad you are, but it's to find out what's going on with your life that we now need to change. The fourth experience is let's figure out what you need to do in order to become your ideal self. And then number five is the experience of making small steps of progress, not so you get off probation, not so you can just get out of trouble, but so you make small steps toward who you want to become. And a practical example of that in one jurisdiction was a young man who wanted to have this is down in Milwaukee County when I first started this. He wanted to have his own lawn service. His gift, his talent was he liked working in lawns, man. That was just his thing. And in the case plan, right? And when they went to court, they said, this young man wants to have his own lawn service. And that became the aim. The aim wasn't you're shoplifting and you better stop it. The aim was you want to have your own lawn service one day. And so we shift them from what's called avoidance motivation to approach motivation, from avoidance goals to approach goals. When all you have, it's like our children. If they go out and we say, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and don't do this, those are called avoidance goals. All the stuff you need to avoid. The research says if my life is laden with avoidance goals, it increases my anxiety and I'm more likely to reoffend. I also need approach goals. What do you want me to go do? And so this gives them approach goals, things that they can pursue. And as an aside, he came to court. They called me later because I wasn't there when it happened. But he came to court because he created these little business cards that was called, I don't know what his name was. Let's just say his name was Jerome. He called it Jerome's Lawn Service. And he walks into court, he goes up to the bench and gives his business card to the judge. It was hilarious. He says, Judge, I'm gonna have my own lawn service one day. And the whole court hearing was, sounds good. So are you getting your urine test done? Because you can't have a lawn service if you're high all the time. So we're able to link what he had to do to who he wanted to become.
Mm.
That's the framework that I've developed.
Oh, that's beautiful stuff. Yeah, in church thinking,
Okay.
we disciple people, and discipling is much like what you described.
Yes, yes.
So I'm going to give a term to what you do. We disciple and you citizenate. So
Love it.
obviously that's probably not going to end up in print, but
But it sounds good, Avery. It sounds good.
okay. Who are the greatest beneficiaries of your tool? Who puts them to work? I think you've kind of implied that it's the professionals in the juvenile justice system. Um, could you name those professional roles?
Yeah. There's several. The first is what are referred to as juvenile probation officers. And the country, by the way, is starting to shift from that. In some places, they're called juvenile probation counselors. And in one jurisdictions, they drop probation altogether and call them human service workers. But they are your core youth justice practitioners. They handle the cases. So let's just call them the juvenile justice case managers. Then the second group are the judges. And in one of my jurisdictions, Hennepin County, Minnesota, we developed what's called a bench card. Judges have all kinds of bench cards, which is a quick reference tool to help them on certain cases. We created a bench card on this framework that included those 5 experiences that judges use. So the judges are using this now as a part of their conversations when they're in the courtroom. They still address the offense, but they've got to look at who the youth wants to become. So judges. The other side of the legal coin are our public defenders and our prosecutors. They're the ones who get the cases. They make the charges. The prosecutor says do this. The public defender is there to defend them. And so we have met with them. And then the last critical group, and I have to give lots of credit to the folks in Hennepin County, Minnesota, because they really helped me see the importance of this group. And I've just finished, it's my last deliverable that I finished on December the 28th under my last contract, was developing a guide for this particular group. And they are your community-based service providers who work with these youth. And some of these are like mom and pop shops, and some are more established counseling organizations. But you can have upwards of 80 to 100 of these contracts with all these community service providers to work with these young people after they've gone through the court process. And so now they're utilizing that. And I met with about 130 of those community service providers in Hennepin County, Minnesota, earlier last year. And it was a great meeting. And they love the framework. They identified with it right away. So those are the groups that are utilizing this framework.
It sounds as if parents would benefit by the knowledge that they would gain by understanding your framework, as well as church leaders. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, you are, because they have to actually work with the youth and the family. That is a big thing, and it's one of the early questions I got as we began developing this. And the guidance I give them is on helping parents understand the identity formation process and how a young person forms it and what those mental tasks are. For example, one of the tasks in forming an identity is the need for exploration. It means I need to try a bunch of stuff. I need to sort of test the waters, sort of stick my toe in and see if this is any good, whatever. And so in one example from one of my jurisdictions, the father was sitting there and the young lady had met with the juvenile probation officer and had disclosed that she really dreamed of being an attorney one day. She saw some television program and she wanted to become an attorney. Okay. They said, great. All right. So we're going to work towards. You've been arrested. It's your third arrest, but now we're going to work towards you becoming an attorney. So we got to stop these arrests. We got to stop this. We help you become an attorney. And when she said that, her father goes, what? Girl, you can't be an attorney. Where'd you get that idea from? That's where the parental piece comes in.
Mm.
What we know from the research is the ideal self, no matter how big it is, you've got to accept it and run with it. Because it is not about what it is specifically. It is about that they're thinking about the future. And that's the critical dynamic. The research calls it future orientation. And the part of the brain that gets turned on when I start thinking about the future is called the prefrontal cortex. The part of the brain that gets me into trouble, right, is, for lack of a better term, we just sort of refer to it as sort of the survival brain, right? The reactive brain, the amygdala, the feeling brain part. You talked about feelings earlier. When that brain is in charge, I just do all kinds of crazy stuff, right? The prefrontal cortex is designed to rein in that pleasure drive, that pleasure seeking, and put me on the right path. And here's the kicker, Avery. The prefrontal cortex, it is the fourth neural system, and it comes online at about age 12 or 13. And it's from about age 12 or 13 until about age 30 that the prefrontal cortex is going through its rapid development. And so that brain needs support. And so if the young person is saying, I want to be a lawyer, and you're thinking, you're making D's and F's, forget about it. Don't say that. Just look at them and say, okay, being a lawyer sounds good. What are you going to do to get there? Because they need that prefrontal cortex turned on and moving towards it. And in time, they'll shift and change gears once they find out something isn't quite working out, but roll with them, stick with them, and help them work through it.
How do you instill the principle of delayed gratification? Because I think that is a primary adult concept that's so hard to instill in youth, because I don't know which part of the brain does it. I think you explained it very well, but a part of the brain says, I want it now.
Yeah. Right.
And the idea of it's going to be better if I delay gratification is just so foreign to youthful thought. So how do you bake that in?
That's where the identity piece actually does come in. And you set me up very perfectly. The field of research that has looked at what you just described has defined their research as the identity value model. Identity value model. And it basically means this. Once I have a sense of who I want to become, and I know I want to be this lawyer, right? And number two, once I have a firm belief that I can make progress towards getting there, I now have the two things in place, right, that gives me a framework for valuing specific kinds of behavior and not valuing other kinds of behavior. I'm going to be more likely to value behavior that moves me towards the person I want to become. The identity that I have, does it align with it, as opposed to something else? So it's the identity value model. It moves me in that direction, and it keeps me in line with that. I'll give you an example from my life, and this was in high school. And I had been successful enough to become student body president. Cool, right? So now my identity is forming. Who am I? I'm student body president. I'm involved in student council. I was also in the drama club. You might remember some of this stuff from watching me growing up.
Oh, I do.
All that stuff, right?
Yeah. We thought you were going to be the next Sidney Poitier.
I love it. Exactly right. And I was on the debate team, right? Now, this is all the stuff this is my sense of who I am right now. And I remember when I was with some guys, and I don't think I've ever shared this story with you. I was with some guys, and they picked me up to take me to school because we had to move. And they rolled up the windows in the car, and they took out some weed, some marijuana, whatever. And they go, "You want a hit, man?" And I'm like, "No, I'll pass." Now, most people would say, "Those are great resistance skills, Jonathan. You have great self-control." But you know what flashed into my brain? Getting high, that ain't consistent with being student body president. Getting high and the debate team, those things don't go together. Getting high and being like the great actor with the drama club, that doesn't fit, right? Identity value model. If there's nothing going on in my life, if there was nothing happening and I was bored and I was idle, I would have probably gotten high that day. And who knows what else would have happened after that. That's the thin line that we walk. And so when our young people show an interest in something, pursue it. Give them a basis for valuing the positive behavior we want them to have.
Oh, that's exciting to me because I see another component we can put in that soup. So all of these great tools that you put together, and you put faith on top of that as icing, and I think you have a formula for success.
Thank you.
Because now we are telling young people that you have supernatural intervention available to you to help achieve those goals. So now when they start hitting those obstacles, they have somewhere to go for help besides their peers or a disinterested adult, because they know that God's always interested. So so this really excites me because it seems to me that this tool would be of great value in the hands of church leaders, and that churches should consider getting involved in the juvenile justice system.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I just want to go back and just do a play on your word, that supernatural help, because um, there's a passage somewhere in the Bible, I think it's Old Testament, I'm not sure, where he says he would give you the desires of your heart, something like that. And many people look at that and say, well, I want $1 million. You're not going to give me $1 million. And that's not what it's about. What it's saying is that when you are aligned with God's will, and let me tell you how I translate that. When you are aligned with what he's put in you, the talents he's given you, the gifts he's given you, the burden he's put on your heart to do certain kind of work in this world. You were not born just randomly. You came into the world, and the universe, God knows your name, right? So when I pursue that, yes, God opens doors. There is no way I would be doing this growth focused case management unless there was that kind of supernatural intervention. I gave you a flash of it, Avery, a minute ago, right? Met John Toole 25, 30 years ago. That's his name. He's the guy who runs RFK National Resource Center for Juvenile Justice. Worked with him 5 or 6 years, forgot about him. 15, 20 years later, he shows up in Milwaukee, where I'm working. Do you think that's an accident?
No.
It's not an accident. That's a supernatural intervention. What was I doing in Milwaukee? That was my pilot site for growth focused case management, youth justice, right? Do you think it's an accident that he looked at it and said, man, that fits with what we're doing? That's the supernatural intervention. I was just out there trying to do my thing. Some people look at me and think that I had this master plan. I've got 9 prisons in Minnesota that's going to be utilizing this. What a master plan you have. It's no master plan. I just get up in the morning every day, do what God puts in my heart, and I follow what's within me, what's in line with my identity. And that's the supernatural intervention. And so I just want to put that out there for those who sometimes think that we run to God and we ask for this bucket of a wish list. I don't think that's how God works. I think God says, you're here. Once you figure out why you're here, all right, I got your back. I am going to bless you. I'm going to open doors. I'm going to make your enemies become your footstool. I will fight for you when you follow my will.
I think we often treat God like a cosmic Santa Claus.
I love it. That's a
And
great
and
point.
we
Yep.
what we want is the gifts.
Yep.
But what he is a cosmic counselor
Love it.
and a cosmic guide. And that's the piece that people don't always sign up for. So
I love it. Yes. Yeah.
well, the audience will be glad to know that you have made the brochure regarding the system you put together available. And I will make that available to our audience for their review so that they can see the great work you're doing, and maybe take an interest in volunteering for for helping in the juvenile justice system. When I was very young, I ran an organization. I shouldn't say I ran it. I was the board chair of an organization called the Court Volunteers. And that's where citizens would
Yeah.
take on a
Yeah.
youth who had been in trouble with the law at least once and
Perfect.
try to exert positive male influence on that person so that they, don't become a recidivist.
Love
And
it.
so I think there are a lot of ways for the church to get involved in the juvenile justice system. But I think the most important way to be involved is before kids ever get there, and to prevent them ever becoming a part of the juvenile justice system.
I
And I
agree.
think that's where the church can do a great job for our communities and for the world.
I agree.
So I'm going to close this out with you sharing any thoughts you would like to share on things you've learned, advice you would have for church leaders, for community leaders. You can take it any direction you want to go, but what closing thoughts do you have for us? And by the way, this has been an outstanding time with you and a conversation that I think the audience is going to benefit from greatly.
Great, great. No, thank you. It's been fantastic, Avery. I would say both on the prevention side of preventing youth from going down the delinquency path, as well as those who are in that system, is you utilizing your church resources and the connections of your church members and the institutions and organizations with which they are affiliated to create a vast range of opportunities for young people to explore and to experiment and to take risks in healthy ways. Adolescents need that. And if you've got someone who's got a company that builds houses, have them come up with a little role here or there that a young person can come out and see what it's like to look at an architectural plan, what it's like to order the materials, what it's like to be there when the foundation is laid, what it's like to look at getting people paid. Just tons and tons of opportunities for them to explore these positive exploratory opportunities. Very often they end up getting into trouble because the part of the brain that insists on exploring, and there is a neural process that turns on, time to explore, so you can't stop it. But if there's no good exploration to make, then they listen to their buddies and they say, hey man, let's go hang out at the whatever. And that exploration part of the brain says, that sounds good to me. There's exploration. That sounds exciting to me. So it's not whether or not they're going to explore and take risks. It's do we have an ample range of opportunities? And I think churches have a wealth of that and could do extraordinary work to say, we've got all kinds of things that young people can be a part of for one day, for a week, internships. If you need that, let us know. We've got the chance for them and allow them to explore and discover what they're good at, what their passions are.
Well, Jonathan Cloud, thank you for doing God's work.
Welcome.
And thank you for being a good brother.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you. I enjoyed this.
And maybe we'll have a follow-up and see how things are going as you continue to roll your program out.
Okay, sounds great. Looking
right.
forward to it.
Take care.
apple pie is all about.